frankly, and this is self-serving, I know how important it is to have proper legal counsel during the process, because if you don't, good luck delivering your film. Good luck getting past the gatekeepers at Lionsgate and getting them to even approve of your chain of title. Good luck having a film being accepted on delivery if you don't have the proper music licenses in place. Or you haven't vetted everything from a legal perspective, whether it be clearance issues. I mean, I've got more nightmare stories than you'd ever care to hear about folks that step into these traps and can't escape from them because they weren't properly counseled at the outset. Let me tell you one quick story. Pertains to a short film. I had my first short at Sundance in 1996, and it was part of a shorts package, and it played with a film. My film was called Emily's Last Date. It still makes me laugh. It played in a package with a film called Dry Mount. And Dry Mount was written and directed by this woman named Nicole Simmons. It was her first film. She was going to school, at film school in Ohio at the time. And it was a beautiful film, black and white, looked gorgeous, shot, I don't know if it was 16 to 35, doesn't matter, beautiful, visually stunning. And it was basically a couple getting together on a date. They go to the movies, they come back, and they sort of get it on. And in the background, while they're having sex, not even in the background, sort of in the foreground at certain points, is the David Letterman show. Now, a lot of problems tied into that. The Letterman folks, Worldwide Pants, whatever they're called, they were delightful. They were easy to deal with. But the guest on the episode was Mr. Rogers, God rest his soul, and playing musically was Ethel Merman's There's No Business Like Show Business, right? So we got a couple, it's not a raunchy, it's not a smutty film, but you see a breast in it, and there's a couple having sex, and their dialogue is completely tied into the dialogue on the David Letterman show. They never even thought about it. This film won a special award at Sundance, and HBO wanted the film, which is the absolute brass ring of any short film. This is a short filmmaker's dream. I would pay HBO to screen my films. We could never clear it because Mr. Rogers' people were never going to clear his likeness for use in this short that involved nudity and sexual content. The song, it wasn't Ethel Merman that controlled the rights, but getting that master use and publishing license, because the music stuff is very tricky. You could be talking about $100,000. Like, it just never happened. So it's really unfortunate to have HBO chasing you and you can't deliver them your movie. It's a book by a guy called Michael Donaldson called Copyright and Clearance. All right, I still have this book by my desk. I look at it all the time, and I was an intellectual property litigator. It is a really valuable book. It is somewhat mistitled because it's a really comprehensive look at all aspects of sort of film law, from performance releases to option and purchase agreements. I use it as a reference source largely because I'm going back to the book to examine certain clearance stuff, because I don't remember everything every day or every film that arises. And Michael is always doing revisions of his book. Michael Donaldson is something of a hero in the independent film world and the fair use world, because he's the cowboy that went out there and stood behind this film called This Film Is Not Yet Rated. You guys familiar with this film? Yeah. This Film Is Not Yet Rated is basically a compilation of a bunch of film clips, and it's kind of a quasi-indictment of the MPAA and so on. You know how many film clips they cleared in that film? Hold on. None, not a one. Zero, zippo, nada. The filmmaker started to pursue that avenue to try to properly license the film clips and realized that it was going to cost them, to the extent that folks were even willing to clear it, it was going to cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think it was like $600,000. So these filmmakers were like, God, what are we going to do? This is an important film. And they went to Michael Donaldson and went to Stanford Law School. It has a whole division set up for like pro bono fair use stuff. And they figured out, you know what? There is a way to use this, because the way the law operates, and this is one of the fascinating parts of what we do, particularly in the nonfiction world, because those laws are different on the doc side than the narrative film side, is that you get to use the Constitution. This whole freedom of speech, this whole concept of not stifling speech. You don't really have to clear that stuff, because you're telling a story. You're not simply putting a Starsky and Hutch episode out there and trying to exploit it commercially for the value that's vested in the copyright in that show. You're telling another story. You're telling a story about bad television in the 70s and why all folks in my generation are kind of screwy, or whatever it happens to be. And that's called transformative value. Okay? You're not just rebroadcasting something for its initial purpose. It has some transformative use. You're telling a different story, and it's necessary to use certain elements, albeit copyrighted, copyright-protected elements, in order to tell that story. There's no rule. There's no 3 beats. There's no 10 seconds of Starsky and Hutch or whatever. So it's a little bit of a crapshoot. You're permitted to use as much as is reasonably necessary to tell your story, okay? And there's not that many people out there who are willing to sign off on a letter to an errors and omissions carrier to say 10 seconds is okay. Michael Donaldson is one of those guys. And I respect that man because he's willing to stick his neck out there and is licensed to practice law out there to stand behind it. And he's well respected enough that errors and omissions carrier, those are the folks who insure against these sort of claims, are willing to accept his opinion letters and issue a policy that's not so replete with exclusions that a distributor won't touch it. The use of products in films. I remember, I think you can still watch the Brothers McMullen, and they'll take a can of beer out of the fridge and there's a piece of gaffer tape on it. And it's like, oh, way to shake me out of the movie, It's not necessary. As long as you're using a product for its intended purpose in a non-disparaging manner and it's not the focal point of the scene, you can pretty much use it. So guy drinking a Coca-Cola in a scene is fine. Guy taking a Coca-Cola bottle and smashing it over someone's head, not fine, not its intended use. Character wearing, running, the marathon with the Nike sneakers, fine. That wonderful low-angle shot of the serial killer walking through the forest and he's wearing Nikes, not okay. Some of this stuff is pretty apparent. Good question, and there's a lot of different aspects to it. First of all, I think it's important for everyone to appreciate that facts in and of themselves are not copyrightable. Facts are not copyrightable. The manner in which somebody expresses those facts is copyrightable. So newspaper articles are copyrighted. The information contained in those newspaper articles may not be. All right, so important when you're writing any story that's based upon real life circumstances to multi-source whatever your information is. If you see it in the New York Times, get it somewhere else as well. Get it here, and you're just sort of cross-referencing and only utilizing the facts if you're not going to otherwise seek clearance. We've worked on films that are based upon magazine articles and newspaper articles. So firstly, there's some concern with respect to whether or not you need to obtain the consent of the author of the article, or, it depends upon the relationship between the author and the publication. The publication may own the copyright to it, the author may own the copyright. So if it's just the facts that you're lifting from the article, probably not an issue. And now you've identified an individual who interested you within this article, and you're going to interview them because you're interested potentially in pursuing doing a motion picture about them, yes? Yes, exactly. So now the rights we're talking about there are known as life story rights. Exactly. And the life story rights are generally necessary unless the individual is a public figure, because there's different laws that relate to public figures than relate to private individuals. You can go out and make any movie you want about George Bush, and I encourage you to. But you can't necessarily, make a movie about the guy that lives next door, because they're likely a, private person. So the rights we're talking about here are life story rights, and generally speaking, you want to get exclusive, and if I'm circling around your question, I'll get back to it. What you want to obtain generally is exclusive life story rights, either for the entirety of somebody's life or for a particular period of somebody's life, because you don't want everyone and their brother making a film about the same subject. Those rights include not only the exclusivity provision, which says you're not going to sell the rights to your life in this time period to any third parties. They also include a waiver of the right of privacy, a waiver of right of publicity, and basically say you can fictionalize my life, call me anything you want, make up stuff, mix fact with fiction, and all that good stuff. As to what's protectable and what's not protectable, that's really tricky. You can be inspired by a magazine article or newspaper article. You can read about someone who escaped across the border from Mexico or across the tundra or whatever, and write your own story that utilizes some non-protected elements of it. Ideas aren't protectable. You could walk into a room, into a studio, and say, I want to make a movie about a big ship that crashes into an iceberg. There's a love story, the ship sinks, one of them survives, and that's not protectable. It's sort of a dumb example, but it's not really protectable, as to whether or not you can use certain elements of perhaps interviews you did with these individuals, again, very fact-specific. If, at the end of the day, the movie that you produce leads an individual in the public who's viewing the film to the reasonable conclusion that this is these people, that's a problem, because then that is a violation of the right of privacy.